it's a massive challenge. And as you say, we're seeing more and more that these extreme events are becoming a lot more frequent. And, pretty much every week now in the news, you'll hear a story from somewhere in the world that someone's experienced, massive flooding with all the sort of consequences and that brings as well.
Highway infrastructure plays a crucial role in modern transport networks, but it also presents significant environmental challenges. Surface water management is a key concern, with increasing urbanisation and a growing population driving the need for more effective systems to collect, store, treat, and release water safely. Poor managed surface water can lead to flooding, pollution, long-term infrastructure damage, with around 38% of all roads in areas at risk from flooding, which essentially means more roadworks, more traffic light systems, and subsequently a lower tolerance for other road users. Just me? Anyway, this makes it essential to integrate sustainable drainage solutions that balance performance, resilience, and environmental impact. At the same time, roads and highways can act as a barrier to wildlife movement, disrupting habitats and leading to significant biodiversity loss. Imagine if someone decided to drive the M6 right through your living room. Absolute nightmare. The toll alone would be ridiculous. Innovative solutions such as wildlife tunnels, amphibian-friendly curbs, and guidance systems are helping to create safer passageways for animals while reducing roadkill, which accounts for nearly a third of most animal deaths in a 2023 study, not to mention the fragmentation of an animal's habitat. As awareness of these issues grows, there is a pressing need to ensure that infrastructure projects incorporate both advanced surface water management and effective wildlife connectivity measures. With evolving regulations, new technology, and a greater emphasis on sustainability, the challenge now is to drive the widespread adoption of these solutions, ensuring they become an integral part of highway design, construction, and maintenance. And who better to talk to than someone that lives and breathes this kind of stuff? As a specialist design and application engineer for ACO, Terry Wilkinson has focused his career on the highway industry, both in his 11 years at ACO and prior to this, working as a client, consultant, and contractor for local authority highways. He's a member of the CIHT and ICE and is working towards his chartered engineer status with CPD at the heart of his journey. His professional interests are focused on wildlife mitigation solutions and highway drainage in particular, making him the perfect chap to chat about SUDS, wildlife mitigation, and keeping both humans and animals safe. Terry, hopefully I did that justice. Welcome to the podcast. And did I miss anything from that intro?
No, I think you got everything there. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Right. Let's dive straight into the topics then. And let's put this into a bit of context for the listeners. Can you quickly talk us through what SUDS are and the 4 pillars we must look to maximize their impact?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. So SUDS, sustainable drainage systems, used to be the U used to be a capital, used to be sustainable urban drainage systems, but the U's kind of been dropped and it's now sort of sustainable drainage systems. So it's been around for, I think, the kind of sustainable drainage systems probably since around the 90s in the UK. The first sort of major guidance on it, the Serious SUDS manual, was published in 2007, I think it was. And then the current version was 2015. And it's everything within there to do with design, operation, maintenance of sustainable drainage systems. And kind of simply put, they're there to sort of try and mimic as closely as possible the sort of the natural environment and the natural sort of water course. So they look to sort of treat water as a resource rather than a threat, which we kind of historically have looked at when we think about drainage. And it's based around 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars of SUDS, we've got water quantity, water quality, amenity, and biodiversity. Water quantity in particular has always been the big focus on drainage, particularly roads and highways and that sort of thing. It's a threat. It's causing a safety issue. Let's get rid of it as quickly as possible. Put it into the sewer and kind of get rid of it. Whereas SUDS sort of looks, as I say, to kind of consider a lot more around it. Try to contain that water, utilize it at source, maybe reuse it at source, percolate it into the ground. And as I say, sort of really try to mimic natural processes as far as possible, rather than sort of conventional drainage system, shall we say.
So I suppose it's something we all take for granted, really, and that's a lot of things in construction, that it's just there and we use it, but it's become a critical component of modern highways. So like you said, it aims to reduce flood risk first and foremost. That's how we see it anyway, but also improve water quality and enhance biodiversity, which we'll come on to later on. I suppose its main thing, like I said, that we think about it, is to combat against flooding, and drainage related highway defects actually rose, or from what I've seen in my research, actually rose by over a third in 2023, and that was from the national highways. So obviously a massive issue. However, implementing these systems with existing and new road infrastructures presents challenges, of which you know a lot about. With the lack of legislation to guide us, the need for effective, adaptable drainage solutions has never been greater. So, Terry, can you talk us through some of the biggest challenges we currently face in the widespread adoption of both sustainable and innovative drainage systems?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, there's many challenges around it, and I think it's kind of a really exciting time, certainly I think, to sort of be involved in this sort of work. And thinking about sort of roads and highways, particularly in the UK, we've got probably one of the sort of the densest road networks, one of the densest road networks in the world. So that in itself brings a lot of challenges in terms of space to kind of fit solutions. So when we're sort of thinking about SUDS and nature-based solutions, we think about things like, I guess, ponds, ditches, wetlands, sort of green areas, often sort of quite large areas. So how we sort of incorporate that and bring that into our road and sort of construction infrastructure is a bit of a challenge. But having said that, the certainly National Highways sort of responsible for managing the strategic road network in England, as well as the sort of substantial road network that forms part of that. There's quite a large green estate associated with that. So I think it's around 30,000 hectares of land that they're responsible for maintaining. So there's lots of opportunity within that to kind of look at incorporating nature-based solutions adjacent to the road network with that. So as I say, space is often sort of cited as one of the challenges for kind of not putting these sorts of systems in place. So that's sort of one of the challenges. It's also very, as I say, quite a sort of aging network and infrastructure. There's a lot of challenges there. When a lot of the roads and kind of areas were built, the design standards may have been very different to kind of how they are now. So particularly when we're looking to retrofit into existing infrastructure, that can be a challenge as well, sort of trying to design for current design standards, but maybe on a system and network that doesn't necessarily always come up to those sorts of standards.
Just a quick one on that, your final point there. So I grew up in Cumbria for the first, say, 20 years of my life, and then I moved closer to Liverpool, kind of my second home, if you like. Not that I've got two homes. I mean, I actually live in now. And you know, on that journey, you go from small roads, backcountry roads, to A roads, to motorways, and then back again to the A and B roads. From that perspective, then, is it easier to implement these kind of water management, and I'm thinking more biodiversity when I think of Cumbria? Is it easier to implement these things on the more integrated roads, like I'm thinking Cumbrian hills and things like that, or new infrastructure such as motorways and things? Is the one that's easier than the other?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure there's one that's necessarily easier. I think probably even within sort of motorways and urban areas, the kind of the network itself, although it might be a sort of similar classification of road, some of the challenges around it can be very particular to that part of the network or that part of the sort of area of the country.
Mm.
And some of the sort of things I think about and where I see some, some really good recent examples of sort of SUDs in and around highways and local highways. There's been some great examples in recent years in Wales in particular, and come on to sort of reasons for why Wales is possibly a bit more ahead than sort of other parts of the UK. But and it can be, because sometimes when we think about these solutions, we like to think about maybe, where can we put a big system in that's going to make a really, really big difference. But often it can be sort of smaller systems or networks of smaller systems, like little areas of rain gardens, local, managed by local authorities, often by local communities and things like that as well. So there can be opportunities for that in sort of smaller areas of the network, if you like. And then sort of conversely, I guess, where you've got areas of motorways and sort of long linear stretches, often if you've got that sort of associated green infrastructure adjacent to it, there can be opportunities for that as well. So I'm not sure that really answers your question, but I think it very much depends on, I guess, the site specific location, because even similar types of roads can have different kind of challenges and constraints and opportunities.
I mean, I suppose it's a bit of a not a trick question, but it's so difficult to answer, because it's just like saying that if you build a house, does it matter if you build it on sand or soil or in a city or in an urban? It hugely depends on a whole host of things, really. Okay, cool, excellent. So I want to move on to something that we certainly have never covered on the podcast, which is really interesting, really intriguing, because it's just something you just do not think about. So I think first and foremost, infrastructure projects often intersect with natural habitats, making wildlife mitigation a key concern in construction, which to somebody that isn't in the industry, you just kind of take it for granted. You build a house and nature grows around it and whatnot. But stats from the National Biodiversity Network stated that more species are decreasing than increasing over the last 50 years, with what we do in construction in the built environment having a massive impact. So from amphibian-friendly drainage designs to habitat connectivity solutions, the industry is exploring innovative ways to reduce its environmental impact. So can you delve into the latest wildlife mitigation measures being implemented and how they influence our design decisions?
Yeah, certainly. It's, as you sort of said at the start, in terms of sort of my intro, it's very much an area that I'm really passionate about, and there's some really great examples and things that are kind of developed over the years for that. And one of the big things with wildlife in particular is that their need to be able to move around areas, and this is even more so in certain species like amphibians. That sort of spend part of their lives, particularly when they're sort of breeding in pond areas and then living on land. So the need to be able to move between different areas is key for a lot of their survival, as I say, amphibians in particular. And the UK itself is one of the, if not the most nature depleted countries in the world. And sort of roads, highways and infrastructure having been constructed over many years without much thought kind of being given to that has had a real sort of impact on that. So one of the sort of key things when we're thinking about wildlife is not only the sort of having good quality and correct habitats for them to live in, it's being for them to be able to move safely around those as well. So providing that connectivity back really helps them to kind of to sort of thrive in those environments, and that can be things like green bridges. We're seeing at the minute we've got a massive project underway on the M25 junction 10, the massive green bridge infrastructure going there, and I think it's the UK's, if not the world's, first heathland green bridge. So sort of low-lying heathland being a particularly sort of rare area of habitat in the UK. So sort of incorporating that and connecting that up, and for those sort of species that live in that area, that's for me, that's one of the sort of really big, interesting, exciting schemes that we sort of see going forward. But it's not just about massive schemes like that. That there's lots of other examples as well of sort of smaller schemes. And although I think the UK is probably lags behind a lot of the world in some of these regards. So if you look at countries like country in Europe, like the Netherlands, for example, they've got in terms of their road network, they've got something like a third the size of the road network of the UK, but they've got something like I think it's around 600 bridges or green bridges within that. Where in the UK we've got somewhere in the region of about 10, I think, at the minute. So it sort of puts that into perspective, and that's not even account. Then when you look at other sort of structures like underpasses, culverts, specifically for wildlife and things like that, again, the numbers in certain other countries are much higher than that. But we do have them in the UK, and we are seeing much more sort of increased use of them as well. So and they're not necessarily new things, but people are starting to take more kind of thought and care around how they're designed and implemented within that as well. So as I say, we've got things like wildlife underpasses and culverts, and particularly for amphibians, that's really, as I say, crucial to help them move to those different areas of the network. And we're getting to that sort of when we come to sort of springtime is very much the time of migration for amphibians. So where we've got some of these systems in place, like tunnels and guidance fences that allow them to kind of use these structures and systems, is when you really sort of start to see the movement of them. So we've got things like, as I say, tunnels and underpasses that provide that sort of connectivity across the road and help them to kind of traverse that. We've also got things like, particularly, we've got a lot of area of amphibians, and you've got a lot of road gullies. You can see a lot of them becoming trapped within the gullies. So there's sort of quite simple mitigation measure for that. One of them is like a wildlife ladder, basically a roll of mesh that you can retrofit into a gully, and it allows them to, if they have become trapped, to climb out. And I've seen some fantastic video and examples of toads in particular really have very good ability to climb, and these sort of simple measures can make a really big difference in that regard as well. And combined with other systems, like you can have like a wildlife friendly curb, which is like a standard like a British half battered curb, but quite simply it just has a little recess in it. And the way amphibians move around, if they come up against a vertical surface like a wall or a curb, what they do, they tend to follow it and hug it along. So if they kind of, as they're sort of traversing the road and they come across a road gully, once they're on the grating, more often than not, there's a high risk that they can fall in. Just having a simple recess in the curb in front of the gully allows them to kind of, they'll follow that vertical surface, they'll bypass the gully and come out the other side. So simple measures like that can make a really big difference. And those are things that can be very easily retrofitted as well, at comparatively low cost.
Cool.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, please carry on.
No. Let's say those sort of some of the sort of or a couple of the sort of key sorts of measures that we're starting to see more of.
Cool. So I just want to try and integrate the two here, because obviously surface water management, wildlife protection, they often go hand in hand, like you've been describing. Yet they're rarely part of a single design approach as we would see it, particularly with aging road infrastructure, retrofitting, things like that. It's usually one then the other, apart from new roads, which obviously you can tell you're hugely passionate about getting it integrated. You'd think that if there's more water, it'd help wildlife, but I suppose poor drainage can create waterlogged areas, and that becomes a hazard to wildlife as well. But well-designed systems provide safe water passages, and also it's safer for road users like ourselves. But how do we integrate the two? How do we integrate surface water management with good wildlife protection?
Again, I think that's a kind of a brilliant question. There's a lot to kind of be considered within that. But I think one of the sort of mentioned before, I don't want to keep harking back to, but obviously there's sort of the legacy in terms of the infrastructure that we've got, very much designed around, as I say, collecting that surface water, putting it into a drain and getting it away. Whereas to kind of help in terms of the 4 pillars of SUDS, and particularly around biodiversity and amenity as well. So sort of helping the kind of the green areas around us to flourish. So not only that nature can thrive in it, but also that they're pleasant areas for us to kind of be and live in. We spend an awful lot of time sort of traveling around on roads and networks and that sort of thing. So just being within these sort of green spaces can and does have major health benefits as well. And there's lots of studies documented about, you know, spending time in nature and the positive benefits that sort of brings. But to sort of look at surface water management and consider that within this, one of the things, or one of the major things that has to be considered, is the kind of the quality of water. So looking at that, again, one of the 4 pillars of SUDS, runoff from roads and highways in particular is and can be very, very highly polluted because of all the sort of surface runoff from you know, things like wear and tear from vehicles, oil, salt spreading on the road, various things like that kind of get washed into the sort of off of the road. If we're going to take that water and sort of utilize it to enhance the green habitats around us, we need to think about how we treat that water. So within the Syria SUDS manual that I mentioned, it talks in quite a lot of detail about what they call the simple index approach and the SUDS mitigation indices. So basically it looks at the type of environment and application that you're in, what the sort of levels of pollutants that you're likely to get are, and then how you can quantify and calculate to sort of mitigate against those, so that you can put treated and cleaned water back into the environment, so it can then sort of help habitats to sort of thrive and grow. So pollution is a big one, and sort of how we deal with that and treat that. So a lot of nature-based solutions can and do sort of treat water to help to kind of help provide better water quality. But particularly if we want these habitats to be for sort of wildlife and biodiversity to thrive, we want to at least take a significant proportion of that pollutant out before it gets there. So it's thinking about, as I say, the sort of treatment of that, and then kind of on top of that, you've also got the sort of the issues that I think we're all very familiar with, and we're seeing a lot more in terms of flooding, with sort of more intense storm events and things like that. So it's again going back to one of the other pillars of SUDS, that water quantity, sort of managing and containing that water quantity. Is thinking about all 4 of those 4 pillars within SUDS, and if we can address them all, then it really that's sort of the biggest way that we can help to incorporate solutions and help our sort of green areas around us to really thrive and develop.
It sounds like you've got these 4 pillars, and simplistically, you know, you cover all 4, which sounds quite simple when you look at them in isolation, but the more you drill down, the more complex it gets. And you mentioned something there about pollutants and the pollutants in water, and that brings me nice on to the next topic, where we've had this recent, it's not so recent, probably since the 80s, this focus on climate change, but as that intensifies, the challenge of maintaining and managing highway surface water in extreme weather, i.e. heavy rainfall and things like that, causing flooding and pollutions, becomes really difficult. You know, you go from dry spell to really heavy rain and flooding, which doesn't happen so often, but when it does, it can cause, you know, catastrophic consequences sometimes. And I don't think in some parts of the country our drainage solutions sufficient because they weren't built for the amounts of roads, the number of cars, the number of people we have in the UK. So how do we evolve to cope with this extreme weather that we have, all these extreme weather events, alongside a growing population, maintaining wildlife and biodiversity and things like that? So how do we do this?
Yeah, it's a massive challenge, and as you say, you know, we're seeing more and more that these extreme events are becoming a lot more frequent, and you know, pretty much every week now in the news you'll hear a story from somewhere in the world that somewhere's experienced, you know, massive flooding with all the sort of consequences and that brings as well. And obviously, you know, a lot of the drainage systems that we put in place were maybe designed on principles based, you know, decades or even more ago. So it's, I think one of the first things that we need to do is probably accept, certainly in you know, in the kind of the short term, that these events are going to happen. It's how we can kind of be resilient against them, and look at maybe our systems to, if we're going to accept that they're probably going to fail in these extreme events, how can they fail in a way that is as less kind of detrimental, as harmful as possible, and that they recover very, very quickly. Sort of mentioned at the start about me being a CIHT member. Last year, I was kind of involved as part of a working group where they looked at very much these events in terms of climate impact and climate resilience, and published a paper called Delivering Resilient Transport Network. And that looked at sort of a lot of these challenges. And as I say, sort of one of the big ones there is how our infrastructure can kind of be resilient to adapt to that. And, you know, if we accept that certain areas, maybe in extreme events, are going to flood, have we considered those flood routes and where, you know, where they're going to go? Is there sort of areas that we can utilize for when we do get temporary surface flooding? Can we utilize those and contain them maybe in a safe area that's not going to cause as much harm, although it might, you know, provide lesser inconvenience in terms of not being able to use these areas in the short term, but obviously that's far more beneficial than you know, sort of major impact to infrastructure and housing and everything else like that comes as part of that. And I think one of the other really big things and really important things about sort of management of surface water and our drainage systems is the importance to maintain them. That won't necessarily solve all of the issues, but you know, if we had a drainage system, you know, comprehensively that was functioning correctly, you know, that wasn't blocked, and you know, everything was working, that in itself I think would help a lot. We've got quite a sort of infrastructure around us, and budgets are often tight, and sometimes unfortunately one of the first things to go in terms of sort of cost cutting is looking at maybe reducing the frequency of maintenance and things like that. But I think it's really important, not only in drainage, but so many things on the highway, that these things need maintenance, they need upkeep to kind of help them functioning correctly. And I think it's, although in the short term it can be a sort of a cost saving exercise, in the long term the side of the impact in terms of cost and everything else that goes with it far outweighs that. It's a challenge. I don't know that the kind of the answer to how to address that, but as I say, I think maintenance is a really big thing to consider there.
Yeah, I mean, where I live, there's a lot of trees, and it's something you just don't even consider. But even on the road where I live in, it's tree lined. It's not as idyllic as it sounds. I don't live in this massive mansion; it's just a normal road, but there's trees on it, and you know, every year come autumn, loads of leaves into the drainage system, clogs the drains, and I'd say at least 5 or 6 drains just on our street alone end up being blocked with leaves, and that's just one thing you just don't even consider. Leafy area, fantastic, beautiful, until it rains, until it's autumn, until there's flooding. So it's little things like that make a huge impact. Yes. So coming towards the end now, and it wouldn't be construction disrupted if we didn't talk about the future
Right.
and technology in some way, shape, or form. It's transforming all aspects of the built environment, and highway drainage is no exception. Sensor-based monitoring systems, AI maintenance, predictions, and other digital solutions, which I'm pretty sure exist to enhance our highways and efficiency in water management. But what I'm keen to do is get your own take on how innovations could shape the future of highway drainage, and if there's any barriers to overcome the implementation of these.
Yeah, no, again, I think it's a very sort of rapidly evolving area, and there's lots of technology out there. But I think as probably as highway engineers and civil engineers, that we're often maybe not the best at sort of adapting to new technologies. We do like to follow our guidance and everything else, that untried and tested methods that we know are comfortable with. So I think as an industry, we probably need to get better equipped and better able to sort of adapt and learn about these sort of newer solutions. And just as we were sort of finishing up on the last topic, talking about importance of maintenance, we can use I think we could really make better use of sort of smart technologies, digital technologies, call it what you will, to kind of look at maybe, historically for drainage, highway drainage, for example, typically you have a cyclical gully cleaning program where an authority will go around and they'll clean all the gullies on the network, once a year, once every couple of years or whatever, irrespective. But we could use maybe technology, smart sensors, even when the machines are sort of emptying the gullies, having monitors on them that can see the levels of silt to understand how quickly certain gullies are sort of building up with silt, will help to create better pictures. So you might not necessarily have to go to all the areas of the network, once a year. You can maybe leave some areas that to do once every 2, 3, even 4 years, depending on sort of the knowledge that you build up. And then so that sort of helps to make better use of limited maintenance budgets in that way. I've also seen some great sort of technology, particularly in terms of AI and monitoring, where you can get a really good picture of maybe areas, certainly from sort of satellite imagery and that sort of thing, where whilst you might not see it at a local level, it can give an indication of where you're starting to get maybe more build up of surface water in sort of storm events, that maybe suggests certain areas that either the system could do with upgrading, or maybe that it just needs more regular maintenance. And there's, as I say, there's lots of software packages that I've seen that can allow that. So the data's out there, I think, and a lot of the technology's out there. I think we probably just need to understand how we can better utilize it to our advantage.
Terry, it's been fantastic talking to you today, because it's a subject that, like I say previously, we haven't covered, and I always find it interesting when someone is really passionate about what they do, and it's kind of the microscopic part of an industry, and you never realize the intricacies and the detail that go into these smaller parts. I know it's a huge part of the industry, but these, what we could consider as a smaller part of the industry. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and chatting with me today. It's been really interesting. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.